Silence filled the room. The instant the outstretched hand hung in the air, suspended between two worlds that pretended to coexist in perfect civility. No words were spoken, no voices were raised, no scandal occurred, and that is precisely why that moment became so brutal. Before attentive advisors, directors, and executives, the refusal came cleanly, politely, almost elegantly, as if it were merely a protocol detail, something too small to warrant a reaction. The meeting continued. Papers were collected, chairs moved, screens were turned off, and everyone believed that gesture would be forgotten among corporate reports and minutes. But what no one realized was that, at that exact second, something invisible had been broken. Not a formal agreement, not a signed contract, but a silent cog that sustained entire empires without ever appearing on financial statements. The CEO whose hand was refused did not argue, did not confront, did not demand explanations. He simply observed, memorizing each knowing glance, each uncomfortable smile, each convenient silence, and left the room with the same calm with which he had entered. Hours later, while the city slept believing that power remained intact, systems began to fail, alliances ceased to respond, financial flows vanished as if they had never existed. The following morning, even before the first coffee, more than 100 trillion had simply stopped circulating, evaporated without warning, without attack, without visible culprits. Councils convened in panic, executives stared at blank screens, leaders realized too late that they hadn't lost money, they had lost support. And then came the question that no one dared to ask aloud, but which echoed in every mind. How could such a small, silent gesture cost everything? Because that day, it became clear that true power doesn't shout, doesn't threaten, doesn't humiliate. It simply withdraws and lets the world crumble on its own. Before we delve into this amazing story, tell me which city and state you're watching from. Leave a comment and I'll reply with gratitude. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like this video. We want to share more stories like this. The meeting had been scheduled as strategic, one of those that define global directions without ever appearing in the news. And everyone present knew this from the moment they crossed the glass door of the room. It wasn't just another corporate meeting. It was the kind of table where silent decisions shaped entire markets, brought down smaller companies, and strengthened empires that seemed unshakable. The executives positioned themselves with the confidence of those who had always been in control, each carrying in their gaze the certainty that nothing would deviate from the planned script. When the invited CEO entered, the atmosphere changed almost imperceptibly, not through noise or fanfare, but through that unsettling feeling of presence that cannot be explained, only felt. He greeted everyone with politeness, firmness, and respect, like someone who deeply understands the symbolic weight of each gesture in spaces of power. The initial conversations flowed with rehearsed naturalness. Graphs appeared on the screen, projections were discussed, gigantic numbers were treated as if they were just decimal places, and each word was chosen to sound rational, neutral, professional. Then came the protocol moment, that automatic gesture that usually goes unnoticed, but which on that day would become the axis of everything. The hand was extended cordially, not as submission, not as imposition, but as a basic sign of mutual recognition. The response came without words, without aggression, without any explanation that could be formally contested. Just an elegant retreat, a gesture of restraint, an invisible limit imposed before everyone. Some immediately looked away, others pretended to adjust papers, while a few observed attentively, trying to gauge the real impact of that moment. The meeting continued, as if nothing had happened, and this was perhaps the most disturbing detail. No one interrupted, no one questioned, no one officially recorded what had occurred. The collective silence validated the gesture more than any speech could. The invited CEO remained there until the end, contributed ideas, presented solutions, listened to objections, and responded with surgical precision, as if that episode had no importance whatsoever. Upon leaving, he thanked everyone for their time and wished them success in their future projects, leaving behind a room that he believed had maintained control of the situation. What no one realized was that, while they discussed margins and projections, something much deeper had been decided outside the spreadsheets. That man was not just another powerful executive, he was a point of convergence, a silent link between interests, funds, consortia, and informal agreements that don't appear in contracts but underpin the entire modern financial edifice. His influence didn't operate through direct orders or explicit threats, but through presence, trust, and invisible alignment. By withdrawing without confrontation, he didn't declare war, didn't plan revenge, didn't trigger aggressive mechanisms. He simply stopped supporting. Hours later, in offices scattered around the world, small anomalies began to emerge. A transfer that wasn't completed, a signature that didn't arrive, a confirmation that remained pending without explanation. Nothing alarming in isolation, nothing that justified immediate panic, but like perfectly aligned dominoes, each delay fueled the next. Strategic partners began to hesitate. Investors requested unexpected revisions, legal counsel advised caution, and trust, that invisible and irreplaceable asset, began to slip through their fingers without anyone knowing why. Within the companies involved, managers tried to maintain the appearance of normalcy, assuring everyone that everything was under control, while feeling a growing unease that was difficult to name. What had been broken in that room was not a financial agreement, but an implicit pact of recognition. And when that kind of pact is broken, there is no clause for reparation, no penalty, no negotiation that can quickly resolve it. At the end of that first day, they still believed it was just operational noise, a temporary adjustment, something that would be resolved the next morning with a few phone calls and emergency meetings. No one imagined that this had been just the beginning of a silent, meticulously logical collapse, where the absence of a single pillar would cause a structure valued at over 100 trillion to crumble. The following morning, the sun rose as on any other day, indifferent to what was about to be revealed behind the scenes of power. Executives awoke believing they would only deal with routine commitments, hurried coffees, and predictable meetings. But the first few minutes in front of the screens were enough to violently shatter the feeling of normalcy. Indicators that had always been stable appeared frozen. Capital flows simply did not move, and answers awaited for months did not arrive. Initially, it was treated as a technical problem, something commonplace in complex systems, but unease began to grow when no power plant could explain the real reason for the failures. Phones rang in quick succession, urgent messages crisscrossed departments, and the word "wait" began to be repeated with unusual frequency. As the hours passed, the scale of the problem became impossible to ignore. Major partners cancelled meetings without clear justification. Funds withdrew investment intentions, citing strategic reassessment. Boards convened hastily, trying to understand why decisions that seemed certain the night before were now being avoided with awkward silence. There was no public announcement, no official statement, no external attack. What existed was a gradual, almost elegant withdrawal of support. Each unanswered call, each vague response, each seemingly harmless postponement eroded billions in value without it being possible to point to a direct culprit. The real panic began when analysts realized that this was not a localized crisis, but a chain reaction that spanned entire sectors, different continents, structures that had always supported each other without ever needing to formalize that support. Meanwhile, The CEO who had been at the meeting continued his day with absolute normality. He did not call press conferences, did not make posts, did not meet with allies to celebrate or plan. His posture remained the same: silence, observation, and distance. It was not indifference, it was full awareness that the process was already underway and no longer required interference. Throughout the day, numbers began to solidify, and what had previously seemed unthinkable was whispered with growing fear. More than 100 trillion had ceased to circulate, not as stolen or transferred money, but as value that simply ceased to exist. Companies once considered solid realized that their size depended less on concrete assets and more on invisible relationships that had been broken. Amidst the silent chaos, someone finally dared to ask what everyone had avoided: where did it all begin? The answer inevitably led to that room, that gesture, that seemingly insignificant moment that had been treated as an irrelevant detail. The refusal had not been just an isolated act, but a clear sign that certain basic recognitions were not universal in that environment. And when recognition fails, the system that depends on it begins to rot from within. Days later, an emergency meeting was requested. The CEO was invited again, now with visible urgency on the faces that had previously maintained an air of quiet superiority. He listened attentively, as he always did, while confused explanations attempted to justify the collapse, attributing it to external factors, global instabilities, and unfortunate coincidences. At no point did he accuse, at no point did he publicly expose what had happened. When asked if there was anything that could be done to reverse the situation, the answer came calmly, almost didactically. He explained that structures of this size do not fall through attack, but through absence, that complex systems survive as long as all their pillars are recognized and respected, and that, once this balance is broken, there is no reset button. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. It became clear that the real cost had not been financial, but moral, symbolic, and structural. The refused handshake represented much more than a gesture. It represented the belief that some powers could ignore others without consequence. History proved otherwise. At the close of that meeting, no one apologized aloud. No one tried to justify the unjustifiable. Everyone understood too late that true power does not need to impose itself, nor humiliate, nor react in the heat of the moment. He simply observes, records, and when necessary, steps aside. And when power steps aside, it leaves no visible marks, makes no noise, offers no explanations. It merely reveals who truly upheld everything that seemed solid. The story of that collapse didn't enter the history books as revenge or scandal, but as a silent reminder that respect is not a symbolic gesture. It is the invisible foundation that holds the world together. And if this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone you love. Click now to share it. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories we're preparing with great care for you.